And without further ado, please allow me to welcome Caroline Hetman. She is the head of data and AI for policymaking at the German Development Corporation, GIZ, to start with the opening remarks. Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Karina, and hello to everyone, and welcome to the webinar on Turning the Page on Data Use, a webinar that is based on a cooperation between Paris 21 here and GIZ. As you already mentioned, I am heading the Data to Policy project at the GIZ, which is the German Development Agency, which is then commissioned by the Data Lab of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And as I already mentioned, this session is built on the cooperation between us and Paris 21, where we want to convince everyone around us that evidence-informed policymaking is important, as it leads to more accurate and targeted policymaking, enhances the trust in the government by its citizens, and it's much more resource efficient. And of course, the last fact, as a German, I love that one. Well, today's session focuses on one of the central themes of the Data to Policy program that I work for, and it is on how to bridge the persistent gap between data production and data use. Through research and collaboration, Paris 21 has identified practical insights from countries that have tried to make official statistics more relevant for policymaking. And in the findings, they remind us that effective data use depends not only on technical capacities, but also on relationships, on communication, and of course, on a culture of trust between the data producers and the decision makers. And by learning from these experiences, we can support others in translating the evidence into action and strengthening the role of data in policy processes. And once more, before I hand over here, I would like to say how thankful I am to Paris 21 for their incredible work that they have done in the recent time. And of course, for this webinar, thank you so much to the entire team. And thank you so much, all of you in this webinar, for joining us today. And with this being said, I would like to hand over to Johannes.
Thank you so much, Caroline. This is really so much welcomed, your introductory remarks. We are also quite delighted to have this work done and doing this work together with you from the GIZ colleagues. And thank you also, everybody, for joining us today, for taking some time out of your busy day. From the Paris 21 perspective, just building on what Caroline was just saying, the question about data use has become a very important one, to understand data use, to measure it. And the simple reason is because it hasn't been very much in the focus for a very, very long time in the statistical community. In reality, I mean, I'm going to the Statistical Commission, I believe now since 10 or 11 years, and the topic of data use has only cropped up very recently, maybe in the last 2-3 years. But before, it was really focusing on data production. And that was, of course, also linked to the important debates we had on the Sustainable Development Goals and the indicators, and to find the data, to develop the indicators. And the focus was really, how can we close data gaps? It was all about data gaps, close the data gaps. But to some extent, we have been successful. And I think I also feel that this isn't clear to everybody in the policy field, how successful overall all the statisticians of this world have been to really make a big progress in terms of developing the indicators, but also the data, the underlying data, how that has changed. And there are some numbers that document this important trend. Yet, the use of this data, has it been used for improving decisions, for making decisions at the local level? And here we talk about the country level. That's a different question. We often talk about the SDGs, general monitoring, but at times we may miss this specific aspect of data use in countries at the national, but also at the subnational level. Now, why is this important right now? Even more, I would say, urgent, absolutely urgent, because of two reasons, I think. The first is that all statistical offices, I think, in the rich and poor countries are under immense financial stress. And this will not change. This will not change. There will be more pressure. There's public pressure on saving money. Politicians will not give much. I think they will just take the data that they believe is good. The premium for quality data, you have to make that case very, very clearly why your data is better than if you go to Google or somewhere else, ChatGPT. So to make the case for quality data, you can only make this if you can show it's really used and has an impact. So that's one angle. The other angle is the legitimacy crisis. I recently published a short article with a colleague, with a professor, Stefan Verhulst, and a colleague from the Belgium National Bank, where we argue that often the data doesn't speak necessarily to the lived experiences of people. There's a discrepancy between facts and feelings. And the data use could help us to close that gap. How can we get our data for policy making that makes a felt difference for the people? So you don't publish a summary average number on GDP, and then you have a person saying, I can't eat your GDP. I don't understand your inflation figure because if I go to the local market, I pay so much more, and your inflation figure of 2 percentage points doesn't resonate with me. So all these things are very important now. And I'm very happy that we have now this policy brief, which really brings two elements to the fore, as Carolina said. It documents of how we can measure things, but it also unpacks how we can get what are the factors, the determinants that can help us to have that data used on the technology side, but also on the political environment, the ecosystem side of things. So really excited now to open this and give the floor back to Karina, and looking forward to a great discussion later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johannes, and thank you, Caroline, for these wonderful opening remarks. And I think this set us ready for the presentation, and where we will learn more about this unpacking of the drivers for data use, and we will also hear from different perspectives in the panel discussion on how this looks in practice in different countries and under different contexts. Now, we will have a short presentation to showcase the main findings of the policy brief, and this will be done by our dear colleague, Sophie Kennelly. She's a policy analyst at PERS 21, and she will walk us through the main findings of the brief. Sophie, the floor is all yours.
Many thanks, Karina and Johannes and Caroline, for those fantastic opening words. I must now live up to the expectations. So if, Karina, you wouldn't mind just confirming that you can see my slides?
We can see your slides.
Fantastic. So I'm going to start with a little bit of the genesis of the report. So bear with me. I thought I would have maybe been a philosopher in another life. But I think it's important to ask ourselves why we sometimes see data as a special product. Because in many respects, it is a product like any other. It requires money, skills, and time to produce it. It is important that supply meets demand. I've taken here the example of an apple, but if we produce too many apples that are never eaten, we have a surplus. If we don't produce the right apples, we're not meeting demand. If the apples are of a bad quality, they're not going to be consumed. If we don't trust where they come from, they're not going to be consumed. The produce must reach consumers. So if the apples stay in the apple field, they are never going to be consumed. And like any other produce, apples and data have a sell-by date. They have a use-by date. And if we go past that use-by date, they lose their value and they lose their objective to be consumed. So for any other product, we would usually invest in understanding consumption. Who is buying what, when? Is the production line financially sustainable? Are people satisfied with the product? And what influences consumer behavior? So why don't we do the same for data? And this is very much what we've done in this policy brief and in the study or various studies that it stands on. So our primary research question, as Johannes mentioned, is what are the factors that influence data use in policymaking processes? We do look specifically at the use of official statistics, while also exploring the alternative types of data that might be used in policymaking. We build on 4 country studies conducted in Kenya, Rwanda, the Dominican Republic, and the Maldives. But we also conducted several additional sort of validation interviews to understand what this might look like in other settings, so different income groups, and also compared it to literature on data-driven policy in OECD and OECD countries and various income groups. In total, we engaged over 200 stakeholders, so users and producers, including national statistical offices, gender machinery and other government ministries and agencies, civil society, academia, and development partners. And just perhaps to see, or to talk a little bit about what we mean by data use. There are a lot of assumptions about when data is used in the policymaking cycle and how, but actually there are many different ways. We tend to think of what we refer to and what is referred to in the wider literature as instrumental data use. And I like to think of this as when data really trigger a policy change. So the data might shock us into introducing a policy. It might guide us in exactly what that policy looks like, or inform our decision directly on who to target with that policy. But data can also be symbolic. So we might already know something is an issue, but using official statistics or using different types of data to justify that decision can give that decision more legitimacy. So it's also an extremely valuable type of data use. We see, for example, some great examples of where civil society have already used sort of grassroots evidence, different types of evidence on various issues. But until they use official statistics to kind of confirm and validate what they already know, it's often, their cause often isn't taken up by policymakers. And the final type is conceptual type. And this is perhaps the least direct form of data use, where data are used to shape attitudes and understanding, be it of the public, but also of different policymakers around a certain issue. And what we see through the policy brief is that actually all 3 of these types can be particularly powerful. We also have 2 different types of factors that we find to influence data use. And the first of these are technical factors, which again may be those that we immediately think of when we think of enablers of data use. And these include things like skills, tools, and resources that might help us effectively use data. But there are also a whole plethora of non-technical, or you might say political factors that equally influence data use. So these are within the wider political economy, such as social norms, different stakeholder relationships, competing incentives, and power dynamics. And until we address and acknowledge these sort of non-technical factors, it's quite hard for these more technical factors to be effective. So we really encourage in this brief sort of looking at these different types of influences hand in hand. I'm going to force myself to focus on 4 key takeaways, that these really are just selected, and perhaps my bias on the ones which are most interesting or most pertinent. And the first is that many barriers and enablers to data use are common across income groups and geographies. So what we saw in the 4 country studies, but also in our wider research and in comparison with the wider literature, there are some very clear
sort of common factors that are influencing policy. But at the same time, there is a lot of local nuance to these factors. So one example is social norms. We see that in every country, social norms influence what data is produced, how it is produced, if it is disseminated, and if and how it is taken up. But exactly what those social norms are varies quite significantly by country. The second point is that official statistics play a very unique role in policymaking. And there are sort of two reasons or two groups of reasons for this. The first is sort of the nature of official statistics in the sense that they are really produced on regular intervals. They have a wide geographical scope, and they are usually based on very rigorous and often openly accessible frameworks. But at the same time, official statistics are also particularly powerful because of their distinct legitimacy as a government data source. We see that this power, if you like, of official statistics is even stronger in some sensitive policy areas, such as gender, where policymakers might often face more backlash. So being able to draw on official statistics proved particularly powerful. The third point is relevance and timing, and quite how much they matter in terms of disseminating data. There's often a tendency to disseminate data as soon as it is ready, which is, of course, extremely important. But there's a lot to be said about the redissemination of data. So policymakers are far more receptive to data when it is relevant to ongoing policy processes. So the main time to disseminate or redisseminate data is when there are relevant policy processes going on. So for example, if we have education data, those key moments are going to be the development of the education policy or the monitoring and evaluation of that education policy, which we like to refer to as sort of windows of opportunity for take-up, which may be more effective than targeting sort of key international dissemination days, like International Women's Day or International Children's Rights Day, which perhaps aren't so aligned to ongoing national or local processes. And the final point is that interpretation is key. So we often talk about data-driven policy, but in many respects, this is quite misleading because very rarely is a data used as an input for policy, but rather an analysis or an interpretation of this data. One example that struck me particularly is, for example, in I think it was the Netherlands, where there was a large amount of data and research into women going back to work after having a child. And the data suggested that actually a lot of women were choosing not to go back to work. But how to respond to this in a policy, how to give a policy response to this very much depends on whether you see this as a positive thing. Is it good that women are spending more time with the family, or is it a negative thing? Should women be encouraged to be in the workforce? Do women have more opportunities if they enter the workforce? So this layer of interpretation is really essential and happens organically when data has been translated from sort of raw data to policy insight. So much for the key takeaways, but maybe just to give you an idea of what to expect when you open up the discussion paper. We've split up the findings into 5 separate chapters. The first one is about the nature of data production and planning. So sort of what aspects of data production determine whether data are used or not, or how can changes in the way that data is produced or disseminated better encourage use. The second is about data sharing and coordination practices. So sort of those factors that influence data sharing between institutions or with institutions and the public. The third chapter is on capacity to turn data into actionable insights. So this really talks about the importance of interpretation, the importance of analysis, and complementing official statistics with different types of evidence. Fourth, strategic accessibility, communication and dissemination. So some very specific technical and non-technical challenges associated with data accessibility, communication and dissemination. And then finally, an enabling environment to data use. So some of these more overarching challenges that might affect data use stemming from how that data is planned and financed right through to its uptake in policymaking. So a very whistle-stop tour of data use in policymaking, but that's all from me. So over to you, Karina.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, Sophie. I think it's a very good, I'll say, introduction to the policy brief, and I'm pretty sure that now we are now more motivated to go and look into the detail of those chapters and see what we can take away depending on the role that we play on our daily lives and professional life. Very enlightening. And one of the things that I will take away personally from your presentation is that often when we think about data use, we tend to use all dissemination. Let's make data to, be digestible, so to say, for the different stakeholder groups, and that is not so technically presented. But there is this also other big world that has to do with the non-technical aspects that play a crucial role. So I think it's very important that to highlight that the policy brief touches on these two big areas. It's not only about the technicalities and how data is presented. Those are, I will say, the easy part to address, but there are also other complexities to look at. And thank you so much for you and the team that made that policy brief possible. And now to complement these inputs delivered by Sophie, we will have a very interesting panel discussion where the aim is to see what the policy brief or what turning the page on data use can look like really in practice, how the challenges to data use play out in practice, who are the main actors, who can, or how can we look at a happy ending, how this will look like, and also what are some of the plot twists that we didn't expect or that it was not expected in the research behind this brief. We will look at not all the chapters that we saw from Sophie's presentation, but some of the key chapters. And some of them are engaging policymakers, shared responsibilities between those who use the data and those who produce the data, and also when it comes to maximizing capacity through exchange of skills. And you will see that through the different discussions and interventions of our panelists, we will be touching on those areas. But of course, there are other chapters and more interesting content in detail in the policy brief. Let me introduce the wonderful panelists that we have today. We have, I cannot see my whole screen because I have a small screen, but I know that they are there with us. And we have Shazna from the Maldives Bureau of Statistics. Thank you so much for joining us today. We also have Imelda Acheng from Kenya. She's the CEO of the Kenya Parliamentary Caucus on SDGs and Business. And we have Shona Horter and Don Snape from the Centre for Equalities and Inclusion, UK Office of National Statistics. We see we have a very international panel, and we are very happy to have you here. And we will start this panel with Shazna. Shazna from Maldives Bureau of Statistics. The paper points to the importance of engaging users through statistical processes. What have you experienced or what is your experience in engaging with policymakers? What mechanisms have you tried? What have been the biggest challenges? But also, what are some of the success stories that you have identified in the Maldives?
Well, thank you, Karina, and thank you for this opportunity to Paris 21 as well. And well, on your question for us on engaging with policymakers is highlighted in the paper as well, and Sophie also highlighted. When the users from across the policy cycle are involved in the data production processes, this can shape the data use, right? And to share with you our experiences in the Maldives, actually, we believe that engaging with users, specifically the policymakers across the statistical value chain, from planning, design to analysis and dissemination, it ensures that statistics meet the real country needs, actually. And also it fosters the ownership, trust, and the usefulness of the data products which we publish as well. And when policymakers are part of the process, they are more likely to understand the data, interpret it correctly, and act on it to make a difference in the community. The Maldives National Strategy for the Development of Statistics, the 10-year plan of our statistical system, is the key framework designed to strengthen our statistical system in a coordinated and strategic way. And also it ensures that the official statistics in the country are not just technically sound, but relevant, timely, and aligned with policy needs. And the NSDS clearly calls for the data user engagement across the country as such, and mainly to ensure that relevance of statistics to policy planning and monitoring needs, and as well to bridge the data production and the user gap. And in 2023, as highlighted by Sophie as well, the Maldives Bureau of Statistics, together with the Ministry of Social and Family Development, we partnered with the Paris 21, and we conducted a joint study exploring the barriers and enablers of gender data use in policy making in the Maldives. And the study comprised of a desk-based research, which was conducted with multi-stakeholder involvement, including the policy level people. And on the theme on one of the theme of the report, the uptake of data in decision making looked at the wider context around gender data use in policy making in the country, such as the role of social norms, the culture around evidence-based policies, and the potential importance of aligning policy making and the data cycles in terms of priority areas and timing as well. And based on the report, most of the participants involved in the policy making did not cite as a lack of data as the most fundamental barrier to use gender data in the policy making. But updated data availability does remain a challenge in policy development and implementations. And apart from the study, we do have interagency working groups established to coordinate and address the key data issues and gaps, namely at the moment a working group for gender statistics, a working group for vital statistics, and as well as for environment statistics is currently in effect, working together with us. And we also set up sessions with policymakers and sector experts to align our national surveys and censuses to user needs, prioritize indicators which is needed at policy level, and we do review preliminary findings together. And we do organize workshops to help policymakers understand our statistical outputs like census surveys, the results of these different policy briefs, and discuss its limitations and explain how to interpret data in the context through focused discussions as well. And looking at some of the currently ongoing initiatives like strengthening the administrative data sources for official statistics compilation and for the use of administrative data sources for a register-based census. We are currently working together with the UN team, and we have had planned, and we have also in the past also had this high level. We usually have high level segments in all these after the technical sessions. We do have this high level segment arranged where policymakers such as the ministers and senior policymakers and agency heads do participate actively in the process. And these sessions ensures that statistical activities are directly aligned with our national development goals, enabling data to for the decision makers to make informed decisions. And with the support from Paris 21, we had sessions during this year for our parliamentarians as well, one session, and to the parliament staff who who supports the parliamentarians' work. We had a training as well on strengthening the policy making using data and statistics in the Maldives. And the objectives for the engagement was to create awareness of the emerging issues and the products in data and statistics, and also to share data and statistics products of MBS with the members of the People's Majlis. And this session actually guided us, the MBS, to create a pathway for strengthened institutional collaboration between the MBS and the People's Majlis, the parliament, apart from that, usually after releasing statistical outputs, the reports, we do hold briefings and policy dialogues to contextualize the findings and collect feedback for future improvement as well for our different initiatives. And we try our best to make policymakers be involved, but we do have several challenges, yes, where policy to name, some of them policymakers often lack time to engage deeply in data discussions, and unless they do have a clear immediate benefit out of it. And also limited statistical literacy among them makes it hard to have meaningful engagement on the technical components as well as the statistical methodologies as well. And also in in sensitive areas or issues, there's some resistance to data use actually from the policy makers. And most of the time, maintaining regular engagement with the policymakers is kind of difficult for us because they do lack time and they work on a very tight schedules, right? And these are some initiatives and challenges through our experiences in engaging policymakers. And in conclusion, I would say, yeah, we do have, for a bit, do have some, collaborations established with some of the key agencies, policymakers as well. And we believe that continued meaningful engagement with policymakers isn't always easy, but it's essential for the data to for the development of the country for the policymakers. And the more effort we invest in building these relationships and tailoring outputs to their needs, the greater the impact of our statistical work, we would say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Shasna. And I'll say from the last aspect that you shared, and is that is not easy, but it is essential. And I think through the examples that you shared, you show that engaging policymakers is not a one-time thing, or like having just, one conference or one workshop where you bring them together, but it is constant effort and looking for different angles, either through coordination mechanisms like having a task force or a committee, and continuously engaging with them when you see an opportunity to bring them on board and to showcase the data that you have, and also to understand their needs in a better way so that you can continue building on that. And of course, there remain some challenges, but I think this is a wonderful work that you have been doing in the Maldives, and I'm pretty sure that other countries will be inspired by those concrete actions, and looking forward to learn also more from your experience through the different case studies that are published and that document this experience. Thank you so much for sharing this. And let me now go to Kenya. So we heard now from the Maldives, from the National Statistics Office perspective, and now from the Kenyan perspective. We have Imelda, and she comes from the parliamentarian stakeholder group. Imelda, I don't know if you can hear me. I saw that you were there. I cannot see you, but I'm pretty sure that you are there.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Imelda. Imelda, the ultimate goal of producing quality and timely data is for it to contribute to sustainable development and the overall progress of the country. So while National Statistics Office might be responsible for coordinating and implementing much of the data collection, ensuring the use of this data into the policy aspect is equally shared or in the hands also of the government policy actors. In your experience, what are the main skills that have been missing among parliamentarians in terms of using official statistics for policymaking? And also, what efforts have been done to develop and improve such skills?
Thank you so much, Karina and team. Indeed, my name is Imelda Achieng. I am the CEO to the Kenya Parliamentary Caucus on SDGs and Business here in Kenya. And one of the things that we can say has been a hindrance at the parliamentary level when it comes to data use is capacity. There's low capacity amongst politicians when it comes to understanding, interpreting data for purposes of proper legislation and proper planning. And as such, you find that the few who have that advantage then benefit and tend to go ahead of the others. So some members are left behind in their legislative work and processes because they lack that capacity. Another challenge that we have is data prioritization, in that whereas Parliament would need to prioritize data that is useful for the purposes of a legislator and a policymaker, you find that the data that is mostly prioritized by the parliamentarians themselves is data that is political. So this is data that revolves around electoral boundaries, because that affects their votes. And, they're very keen on coming back to parliament and securing their job again. Another thing is data around poverty index, because then again determines allocation of revenue to their areas. Because if your poverty index is high, then it means you have more money. Again, they look at data that is around equality, so that it affects equalization fund. So if they say that you're more marginalized, they focus on proving that they are more marginalized so that they can have equalization fund. That is also a problem when it comes to counties, because we always have the county revenue allocation bill every year, which then gives the county revenue allocation. So that also becomes a problem at Senate, and there's always, at loggerheads on deciding who gets what money, because all of them have this data. Oh, this is what I have. This is the population. These are our needs, and so all these, and so much more around population census when it comes to the time for voting, because then they want to determine that they have the numbers, so they would make the higher the ruling party, or the coalition for the ruling party and such. So these are the data that you'd find that are really prioritized and very fast funded, as opposed to data that should come in terms of oversight, data that should come in terms of legislation and policy making. So this is also a challenge in terms of understanding that all these politics are seasonal, but the longer term as a legislator applies to your work in terms of oversight, legislation, and budget allocation. So I think that is something that we need to change. The other thing I would say is a challenge is when it comes to data, we don't have real-time data within the committees or on the floor. So you find that based on how issues appear in Parliament, if an information is needed and it's not there, if that subject was listed for discussion on that particular day, then it is then postponed to maybe a month later, because they give time to the clerks and the officers to go and find that information. That now slows that process, because if you are looking at a legislation every other time, you have to send someone to get data, send someone to send data. You find that a legislation, a law takes about 3 to 4 years to be passed in Kenya because of such challenges, which is not, it's not palatable. It slows down the whole process. So if we had real-time data, it would really fasten the process of legislation, and then it would then translate to faster development, and citizens would enjoy the fruits of that really, really well. The other thing is also conflicting information. Sometimes you find that maybe a minister has been summoned to appear before the committee or before the House, and so they come up with the data. They'll be summoned to give data on information on something, and they produce their own information and data. And then the legislators also have done their own research on the side, and they have their own research and data. It's very hard for both of them to agree that this is the right data and this is the right data. So that is also another thing in terms of conflicting information. So there should be a mechanism for them to both have such information validated before they appear for such sessions, so that we can avoid such conflict and loggerheads. Then when it comes to also disaggregated data, I think we still have certain elements of inequality. So a lot of people are left behind because of lack of proper disaggregated data. Most of them just tend to look at data from a perspective of age, gender, and then that is it. Or but there are other factors that always come into play that are not taken into account, and as such, so many people miss on resources because their data is not taken into account. The other thing also that we have is on our data protection laws and court orders, our laws themselves. Sometimes they hinder data sharing. So you find that whereas data would have been shared for a good cause, someone goes to court and the law protects them, and someone is sued, but you are sharing that data initially for a good intention. So this should really be looked at. Amendments should be made so that the government can be enabled to access data for its citizens for the purposes of development, legislation, and policy making without any challenges such as court orders or being sued or summoned. And then also, there is the issue of politicization of data collection for development. In that, sometimes when you're doing that field work and collecting data, you're viewed as someone who is going to spy or investigate, vet, or even score the local politicians. So they tend to fight that because they think you're pretending, or maybe even you have a case against them. So you are going to dispute what they have reported in the records, in the budgets, in the bills, in the expenditure. You're trying to collect something to validate and go and use it against them in court. So there's that hostility, even to people who are genuinely collecting data for the right purpose. Then on to now what efforts have been done to overcome such. There's been capacity building from different segments. There's been capacity building within civil society. There's been capacity building within government. There's been capacity building within Parliament. And one of the things I would say, I think Paris 21 has supported 2 capacity building trainings for us at the parliamentary level, which was about parliamentary staff and from 3 departments, research department, department for the clerk and clerk's office, and then legal department. All these departments are very critical because they serve in the committees, and they're the ones who do the groundwork, the research, the reports that then the legislators use or publish or use to make their final decision. And then there's also been efforts to do some data translation to parliamentary language, but this is only upon request. So if you want, if the committee wants to have certain information, then they are able to ask the clerks, and then the clerks will then liaise with the relevant ministries, who will then produce it according to how they want it. But then there's also now need to realize that with such effort, we need to work towards having a standard template that can guide the data collection, so that it makes it seamless and it makes it easy for the officers to be able to collect that data prior to, by just understanding that this would be the data that we can anticipate to have. So they have a standard template, they can collect it prior to, such that when the committee wants it, it's ready. And then, of course, the researchers and the clerks have said there's been capacity building, not only from one angle. And then also the library department is trying to digitize records that involve data. Our website normally has some records, but these records are mostly Hansard reports. And the Hansard reports, if something was shared, they won't publish that report. They will just mention the conversation. So now the library department is trying to digitize all those reports and data that is normally presented physically and are not usually on the website of the parliament. So that from that, we hope that then they can create that as a portal or as another platform on their website where now data can be stored. We are also looking at, allocating more resources towards data generation and data dissemination to the normal budget process. Should that also be a way of empowering the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics? We have that conversation from the last meeting. Our members of parliament, including the vice chair for budget committee, promised to support them if they are able to place that request. We're also looking at, linking data to sustainable development, so that they realize that this data is an issue that affects SDGs implementation, tracking, reporting, and also will help us towards accelerating the SDGs as we move towards Vision 2030. That's very essential for us as a caucus, and our members understand that. So they take more keen interest towards looking at data for SDGs. The KNDS has developed guidelines for citizen-generated data, but also now we need to have such processes of generating data, have parliamentarians involved from the beginning, not just at the last stage where you share the information with them and tell them that this is what you should be having, because that is the point at which then we lack ownership. They don't take ownership of the data, and then all that effort has been done to waste when it comes to policy making, and then we start now a renegotiation, a diplomatic approach to it, and such things. So all in all, now to close, I would like to say it's important for us to sensitize all arms of government, because in as much as we say the KNBS might be able to convince the parliamentarians to use the data, there's still a challenge when it comes to the county governments. There's still a challenge when it comes to the judiciary. They're the ones who come up with all these court orders stopping implementation of laws and bills. They don't know the implication of this, because some people end up lacking development because the court has stalled implementation of projects and allocation of budgets. So if this can be expanded just beyond, parliamentarians, such that, as we're saying, it's sharing, that information should be shared and coordinated amongst all arms of government with the citizens to have a national ownership of our data, then I think we would be really moving in the right direction towards implementing SDGs from an evidence-based, informed decision making. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Imelda. This has been an amazing journey, I will say. In a few minutes, you show us the complexities from the other side, those who use the data, and how it is important not only to have capacity in terms of how to use data or data literacy, but there is much more that needs to be understood in order to raise this awareness and to bring the data use not only at parliamentarian level, but also unpacking this into different areas, whether it's to oversight the policies, the legislations, or the budget allocation, and also at the more subnational level when it comes to the counties, for example, so that there is much more that needs to be done. But I think the learning from the Kenyan experience has also been quite interesting for those who work on the data use side, and to see how parliamentarians are also willing to use this data. But as a data producer, it's also key to understand when this data is or needs to be communicated to those who use it, depending on the policy priorities, the policy cycles, and the way they work. So I think this is a crucial takeaway from this. Thank you so much. And we go now on the third, I'll say, key chapter of this, that has to do with maximizing capacity and skills exchange. And I am looking at Shona and Dom Snape from UK. And could you share with us one thing that emerges through the paper is that each actor has a comparative advantage in terms of capacity to support data use. CSOs, for example, tend to have a high level to certain databases and relationships that can improve and expedite access to data. And academia might be also best positioned to implement qualitative research skills. So could you share some of your experiences in collaborating with civil society and really maximizing your respective skills and advantages to provide meaningful policy insights?
Yes, I think, Jen, are you going to show some slides?
Yeah, I'll pull them up now.
Yeah, we have a couple of slides just to help focus ourselves on what we're doing. So it was just really as context to say, and I'm Dawn Snape from the Office for National Statistics, the Center for Qualities and Inclusion, which is the research center within the National Statistics Institute in the UK. So we're convening civil society and government and academic stakeholders to develop evidence and insights for the people that statistics may struggle to reach, or for whom statistics may not be their most robust at the moment. And to do that, we're working very closely with civil society organizations, supporting and advocating on behalf of those communities, and academics with specialist knowledge and networks. And as well, and the communities themselves, people from those communities themselves. Just as background, the center has been working for some time in this field, and supported the Inclusive Data Task Force, which was an independent task force of experts, senior civil society leaders, and academics, to produce recommendations for the national statistician on how we can be more inclusive in our data in the UK. Going forward. So they produced a whole blueprint for how we can do that that's quite ambitious moving forward. And then our center has been helping to promote that and working to support now the ongoing National Statisticians Inclusive Data Advisory Committee. The UK Statistics Code of Practice is incredibly important to everything we do, and underpins all of our work, and highlights the importance of providing evidence in a neutral, impartial, and unbiased way. And as the National Statistics Institute, we see our role as developing evidence that others can use to develop policy and services, rather than making policy recommendations directly. So being clear that our role is not to make policy lends greater credibility to the evidence we publish, making it more valuable to a whole range of different stakeholders, because we're making the evidence available in a neutral way that others can use as they will do. Okay. And we're working as holistically as we possibly can to try to generate really meaningful insights for people and for policy and for decision makers. So we've evolved a process of co-designing each project in a program of work that we've been doing at the Center for Equalities and Inclusion that's shown. I'll give you some examples from in just one moment. For each project, we have advisory groups that are comprised of experts by experience, so those with lived experience of the issues, and experts by profession. So that might be service providers, academics, policymakers, folks whose work is focused on the topic or the group. At the outset, we identify important priorities of community members and policymakers, and then we use that to develop the research design to address the needs of all of those involved at both sides of the equation. And then we work with those advisory groups throughout the whole of the research cycle to identify, as I was just saying, their priorities, to keep tweaking those priorities if new issues emerge, to ensure the appropriacy and sensitivity and inclusivity of what we're doing in the research design and the methods and materials we use, in the analytical framework and approach that we take, and the interpretations and approaches to feeding back findings to the community groups and for wider dissemination. And to policymakers. So the key aspects of the approach, which we think draw on our strengths, really is at the position at the National Statistics Institute, and to help make the findings more impactful, would be that we're bringing together stakeholders to identify ways forward, basically a whole diversity of stakeholders, and convening different forms of experience and expertise at the outset of every research project. We're bridging the evidence and knowledge gaps between communities and decision makers. We're providing a neutral presentation of evidence which can serve the needs of different stakeholders in keeping with the UK Statistics Code of Practice. We're tailoring our dissemination of evidence to best meet the needs and priorities of a whole range of different stakeholder groups. And we talk to each of them about what they need most from us in order to be able to make use of their data. So that helps to make it more actionable, because we're trying to tailor it to their needs specifically. We support the development of research skills, for example, training peer researchers in communities to carry out work amongst other community members, particularly where it would be a barrier for us or other experts, people seen as experts, to do the research directly. And as the National Statistics Institute, we aim to maximize the kind of rigor and quality and relevance of the insight for policy and practice, and we want to be seen to be doing so to add greater credibility to the work. So we hope all of those approaches strengthen a sense that the evidence we publish is trustworthy, with multiple stakeholders seeing it that way, and that in turn should help to maximize its impact. And Shona will go on now to tell you a little bit about a couple of examples of projects where we use that approach.
Thanks, Dawn. So Sophie mentioned earlier that as part of the Paris 21 policy brief on turning the page on data use, that there may be three aspects to how data influences policy change. And she spoke about conceptual changes, which is around awareness and understanding, also instrumental use, where a policy change may be triggered through the use of data, as well as symbolic use, which is more supporting a policy decision that's already been taken. And I'm now going to share three examples of previous projects that we have done, where we've taken collaborative approaches to design and delivery of research that has had conceptual and also direct instrumental influence on policy. And the first of those is research exploring the educational experiences of children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities in England. At the time that we were scoping this research, the Department for Education were reviewing SEND provision nationally, and there were discussions about whether SEND support for young people should be focused around mainstream versus special educational settings. Children and young people themselves, and especially those with SEND, are often not directly included in data. So often their views are reflected through the use of a proxy, which may be their parent or carer, for example. But we felt it was really important that their perspectives were included in shaping the policy that affects their lives. So we developed a creative toolkit that included things like Lego, drawing, timelines and photos, as well as using STEM toys and traffic light cards so that young people could indicate if they wanted to pause or stop discussions. And these creative tools were really hoping to support young people with different communication preferences and needs to find ways of expressing their views and communicating their experiences. We also had a youth expert panel and steering group that guided the research throughout the cycle and that fed into the materials, approach, and topics that we were exploring. And as well as interviewing young people themselves, we also interviewed parents and carers and had roundtable discussions with educational staff to understand the wider context and to situate young people's experiences within that. And also to better understand young people's individual communication needs and tailor accordingly to that so that they could really meaningfully participate. So this research developed evidence into how young people experience education, also how teachers experience and respond to young people with SEND, and how parents may bridge the gap between young people and teachers, and also navigate the system to be able to access support for their children. The insights highlighted the need for greater flexibility and systems really responding to young people's needs rather than highlighting differences that they may have. And these insights were included within DFE's, the Department for Education's review of SEND provision, and importantly within their improvement plan. We also developed a range of accessible outputs that met the needs of different audiences and included feedback, like Dawn said, around how young people would like to see those findings. And that included a video, young person friendly version of findings, as well as the longer ONS report. And we held teach-in sessions, which we found to be quite effective for engaging with different policy colleagues in translating insights, data and evidence to meet their needs for policy. We also presented the findings at conferences and produced an academic paper on more careful and careless practice within these educational settings that's been accepted for publication in an academic journal. The second example is research that we did into the lived experiences of gypsies and travellers in England and Wales. And these are very underrepresented groups statistically in the UK, and also who face disproportionate outcomes in a range of different areas, including health, education, and also are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. And in order to do this research, we partnered with organisations that gypsies and travellers have trusted relationships with, and therefore were found to be trustworthy, so that we could support their comfort to meaningfully participate in sharing their views and experiences. So life history interviews were held, and these were done by community members with community members. And we also ourselves interviewed central government policymakers, local authorities and service providers to better understand the policymaking process, how people view different forms of data and evidence, and to situate, again, findings in the wider context. So Dawn mentioned that basically for each of the projects, we always have different advisory groups that will shape the research. And we found that to be really crucial in aligning with policy needs and also ensuring that appropriacy and sensitivity. So we sense checked our interpretation of findings with those different groups, and also held focus group discussions where we brought together central government policymakers and community members to discuss the findings and to identify ways forward. We asked the community how best to share the findings in a way that would be accessible for them. And off the back of that, produced a video in partnership with a community videographer, which helped to overcome some literacy challenges that were identified in engaging with written forms of findings. The findings from this research were used by the EHCR in their report on the UK's performance in relation to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. They were also used by the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Gypsies, Roma and Travellers, and CSOs civil society organisations, we use so many acronyms, use the findings to lobby towards things such as the Police Crime and Sentencing Act. So finally, we just want to share one more example that highlights how these different approaches can influence policy. And that was research into the accommodation experiences of domestic abuse survivors, that was in collaboration with a range of different government departments who were doing work on this area. It's now one of the government's sort of priority areas. It's part of the missions, but at the time, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government were evaluating the domestic abuse duty to provide accommodation to domestic abuse survivors, and Home Office and Cabinet Office had also identified this as a priority area. So we did some research to involve survivors and those with experiences seeking different forms of accommodation after leaving domestic abuse to understand their journeys and their needs. Again, the findings were reviewed by advisory groups, and we highlighted and found that people had really varied journeys with accessing accommodation. Many faced difficulties accessing accommodation that they would have been legally entitled to under the duty, and that could influence their sense of safety and ability to leave domestic abuse, with some saying that they remained with the perpetrator for longer as a result. And on the other hand, those who were able to access safe accommodation, this was seen to really support recovery, freedom, autonomy, and enable people to move on from domestic abuse. So it was the accommodation journeys were really quite pivotal in how people were able to recover and move on. So as a result of this research, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government commissioned work to improve access to accommodation for domestic abuse survivors. And again, the research was picked up by several civil society organisations such as Women's Aid, Refuge, in their lobbying work to try and improve provisions for domestic abuse survivors. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but we thought it would be helpful to bring some practical examples into the discussion, and would welcome any questions that you might have. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Shona and Don, for these very inspiring examples and for showing us the how. I'll say, if I should take one word from this, is then the co-design, and to bring people on board from the very beginning. And that makes a great difference, I will say. And just to, let's say, go through the last round of questions for this panel, just to hear one final reflection from your side. We have one quick question for each of our panelists on one last reflection. And I'd like to start with our colleague, Shazna. Shazna, if you could make one call to action to policymakers that will help them to facilitate user-producer dialogues, what would that be?
Thank you, Karina. Yeah. Well, if I may propose one in the Maldives context, I would call the policymakers to make data and statistics a priority and allocate adequate resources to strengthen our national statistical system that could facilitate these dialogues, and for us to build their capacity as well to interpret and use data more effectively, and also to add on for them to integrate user consultations into the national planning processes in a sustainable manner, particularly with the data users, so that we, the NBS, can ensure that data collection efforts are aligned with policy priorities of the country, and that the resulting data is more relevant and timely and more usable for them as well. And to support the ongoing different data user-producer dialogues is a core of national statistical system, through providing their commitment to these different mechanisms, like our ministerial committee consultations, workshops, which we have at high level, and to ensure that the statistics are relevant for them as well, and it be trusted and effectively used in the community as well. And as always, it is said that statistics are only powerful when they reflect and reflect the realities and needs of the users, right? That's what I want to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shazna. And this is, I think, very useful, well noted. And now let's go and hear from Imelda. Imelda, what is the one thing that you will ask of national statistical offices in order to help you better use data or to make their data more usable?
Okay, coming from the parliamentary side, I would like to say that most of the legislators would like to see data that represents the areas they come from. This is because parliamentarians are representatives of the people. So when they go there, they would be very keen when you present something, they would be very keen to hive out information or that data in a particular region. So what they need to do as they're collecting data is they need to realize that they need to have this data also disaggregated according to the geographical and the electrical boundaries. Also to make sure that this data communicates with the legislators when they publish it. Kindly also look at how you can have policy beliefs related to that data, in that a legislator can easily come in and see that, okay, this data was generated around the education sector. But what does it mean in terms of policy? And this can be done in relation to the relevant ministries, because the data the KNBS, for instance, in Kenya has is data that they actually collect from the ministries. So the ministries should be able to accompany all those data that they give with policy briefs that can then be used or proposed to parliamentarians so that they use it to make laws and policies. I think also one thing that KNBS was asked when we had our meeting was that who are your clients when you're generating data? Because, I mean, the way they generate data, the members of parliament did not feel that KNBS is generating data that is meant for their consumption. So they need to relook at that. And if it's possible, for every segment of people that they feel that the data they generate is more relevant, ensure that they narrow down that information from publishing it to disseminating it and to conducting trainings where necessary, and ensuring that there's continuity. That is now in terms of data regeneration, because data expires, and from time to time, we'll need new information and update. Ensure that that is a continuous process. And I'm happy to state that Kenya is the KNBS is working on a centralized data platform where all the ministries will be able to plug in with their information, and they're also trying to look at a standardization of the systems of data across the various ministries, which will then help them in terms of collecting and updating information. That should also be seen at parliamentary level. If that is not there, then they also would consider that they can work towards that by maybe having a liaison office at parliament or a secondment arrangement at parliament for someone there who can easily translate the information and quickly put it on the floor to be consumed and utilized real time. All in all, I know Parliament of Kenya does not have a data office, so that is still some of the challenges that we'll be working on, and we'll be looking at still supporting them from whatever angle that we can towards a more sustainable internal process of handling data. Thank you, Karina.
Thank you so much, Imelda, for that comprehensive list of good recommendations for the National Statistics Office. And last but not least, I'll go to Shona and Don. If you could make one suggestion to civil society that will help them to engage with official statistics and promote collaboration with units like your own, what would it be?
I'd say that we need to work it would be really helpful if civil society organizations could work with us to understand how we can be mutually beneficial to each other. We did some work recently, some research asking civil society organizations if they'd be interested in partnering with the Office for National Statistics to understand how best to engage with the communities that they represent and serve in relation to collecting and sharing data. And the responses we received could be summed up sort of as a qualified yes, they would like to work with us, but they were interested in developing mutually beneficial partnerships where we're sharing our respective knowledge and expertise with each other. So we might share analytical skills, and they might share their knowledge of what works best with the communities involved. And as we're the partner with greater resources, they'd like us to be able to support them to participate in the partnership more effectively. So those things require discussion at the outset to make relationships more equitable and less extractive. So I think those are key things. It's also important to say that some basically the area we're working with is specifically focusing on statistically underrepresented groups. So it may be more difficult for them to engage with official statistics at the moment because they aren't very representative of the groups they serve. So it's also important that they keep on getting in touch to say that, what's needed to improve those statistics, how we can do that, and engage in the kind of consultations that we have ongoing at ONS. For example, there will be a consultation coming up shortly in relation to the 2031 census and what topics and groups need to be covered for that. And that would be a perfect opportunity for civil society organizations to really speak up so that we can be more inclusive in 2031 when we do the next census.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Shona, something else you would like to add, or?
I think Dawn's covered most of it. I think the only other thing that I would add is that we spoke about the different advisory groups that we've had for each of our projects, and often the process of identifying different civil society organizations to approach for that has been through desk research and existing networks that we have. But again, if anyone's interested in hearing more about research that's happening within the centre, or would like to be kind of a part of any communications networks, or like to hear about things that are happening in the future, we would really encourage people to reach out again, because we only know about what we know and who we know about. So I think that can really help to strengthen those relationships, that communication, and to make sure that insights that are generated in the future are reflective of broader society's needs.
Thank you so much for these wonderful recommendations. We take note, and we hope that this is not the only space where we will hear about this, but we will make sure that this is also disseminated to reach the different audiences that we are targeting when it comes to data use. And I would like to thank our panelists for their wonderful interventions. And looking at the time, we still have a few minutes for questions from our audience. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and this is where we can you can type your questions, and we will be happy to say that, direct that to the different panelists or to the presentation we had at the beginning with Sophie. I see that we have one question so far, which is about the presentations that have been made and whether we can share those. Yeah, these will be shared. We are still looking at whether the webinar, whether it will be uploaded to our social media so that people can look at it again, or we will share the presentations in our website, but for sure you will have access to this. Okay, and I see we have, okay, no other questions, but I don't know if from we will give them a little bit of time. Sometimes people are shy. But I don't know, Sophie, if from your side, there are any questions that you will have for our panelists.
I feel like I'm very much exploiting my position here, but I will happily do so. So I will start actually with a question for our colleagues in Kenya and the Maldives. So maybe you could both share a very quick reflection. It's really great to hear about these capacity building efforts and the engagement with Parliament that you're both doing. But I was just wondering how you deal with staff turnover and sort of retaining capacity as well as relationships in times where there's high staff turnover.
No, actually, Parliament of Kenya is one of the best employers in the country. A lot of people really, sorry, they would like to come and work there. So we don't have high staff turnover. There's a very competent and transparent way of even rising through the ranks. So I think they do recruitment every 2 years, and it's very competitive. There are very few slots. If we have turnover, really, it would mean maybe someone has opted to go leave employment, active employment, and just go be independent, do their own business. They have enough, they've made enough, they saved enough, which is at a very older, age for most people. Or maybe someone has left the country, which are very rare cases. So most of the time we just have our staff there. What would happen is sometimes the parliament seconds staff to the county assemblies upon request, which does not mean that it's a turnover, but it's just transferring that skill, to the county assemblies who have lesser capacity in the counties. So when they go there, they go back, their position and the ranking will still rise. When they come back, the position they would have held when they were still, rising while working in parliament is where they're still placed. So that is the thing. What will then again maybe be of note in terms of now turnover is perhaps a situation where someone has gotten a promotion, so they are still in parliament, but they're not doing that role that they had initially been trained to handle. So the person who comes in then will need training. But that is why now we need proper, handing over, proper institutionalization, so that even when they go, they're able to train those who come after them, as long as they're very well equipped and skilled in that area. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Imelda, and thank you, Sophie. I see we have one more question, and this is for our colleagues from ONS. Do you ever feel like resistance from grassroots organizations to engage with state institutions, like, for example, the ONS, as they fear it might change public trust in their independence?
Yeah. Do you want to go first? I'm happy to go as well, whatever. Yeah.
I think so. What we found throughout the research is that it's been concerns have been raised by certain organizations, and it's been really important to provide assurances around how the research is being conducted and how areas of sensitivity may be handled. So one example I can share is research that we did recently into the experiences of displaced young people. And the research was feeding into work that the Home Office were doing and some of the insights related to people's migration journeys. It was trying to include people with a range of different kind of settlement statuses, for example. And some of the partners in that research raised some concerns around the link with government and how we would be ensuring that there wasn't the risk of inadvertent harm from people taking part in the research. So I think that generally we really welcome those discussions. I think it's important to have that open, honest, frank discussion around hearing people's concerns, understanding the legitimacy of a lot of their concerns, and also highlighting the ways in which we can do research to mitigate risk of harm. And partly that is through working in partnership with organizations who have those trusted relationships and who can feed into interpretation and framing of the findings to think about how they may be picked up or how they may be used if they get into the wrong hands. So yeah, Dawn, I don't know if there's something you would want to add.
You sort of said that all. We work really closely with our ethics committees as well, but I think it's really about communicating with the community groups. And also that's why we've sort of done research projects that have involved helping to train peer researchers. So you're skilling the community members to interview other community members, and they have a more trusted relationship that way. And then working with organizations that are already trustworthy to the communities you're working with, and that they feel if we're working together, then maybe that's okay. And so we have to reassure those initial community organizations why all that we're going to do to avoid any data harm, really coming to them from start to finish and engaging with them throughout to ensure the best we can that no harm does come to them, as Shona was just saying.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your answers. I see we do not have further questions, and also in the interest of time, I want to thank you all for your presentations, for sharing your experiences, for complementing the presentation done by Sophie on the insights of this policy brief. And I would like to invite our participants also to look at the brief and look at the different examples that are also showcased there. And yeah, I think we all have learned that data use is not only a technical aspect, it goes way beyond that, and it has really the power to impact people's lives. And with that, I'll give the floor now to Johannes for the closing remarks. Johannes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Karina, and also from Caroline and myself, a big thank you to all the panelists. It was really, really very interesting. I have learned a lot. I mean, I wasn't aware specifically of the political economy of the data issues in Kenya. Very interesting, and how data. I think the interesting example was also we often believe that use by itself is something good. And that's, of course, our objective, but it can still be misused. So poverty data, to misuse the poverty data to get more money for your constituency, it can be good, can be also a negative incentive. And then there's the whole question about the parliamentarian, the voting and those kind of gerrymandering, those conversations. So you see also data is political, and we have to bear this in mind. Maldives, the partnerships you mentioned a couple of times, the user-producer dialogues, bringing in partners is critical for success of data use. And then the UK example, England, I really liked your examples of very close collaboration with specific groups to get access to but also to see the challenges with this. I mean, not every group will be happy to be associated with a state institution. Um, I think what we at Paris 21 can help with is maybe document those cases, those different cases, document them in a certain way, make it some sort of lessons learned. And because our role, I see our role as helping to learn from examples. I don't like so much the word best practices because there aren't often not best practices, but there are some practices that can work in certain contexts and maybe in others as well. So to get people inspired, that's I think is something we would like to continue to work on. Definitely we will continue to work in our next program of work on parliamentarian work. This is really interesting. We have our fall meetings, which is our annual gathering just 2 weeks ahead. Our fall meetings are in Paris, and parliamentarian work will be important. The role of citizens-generated data will be important. And then this whole thing about local data, and sort of how we can help local constituencies get access to their public goods, local public goods, education, health, infrastructure. I think here is something that we had done a couple of years ago, which we may need to come back to, in particular at times where with generative AI, things get much quicker and better and can revolutionize the empowerment of local people to use quality data for making, helping, so lobbying governments to provide the local public goods, security issues also, for instance. So there's a lot of things. So I think with the whole data use debate, we are just at the beginning. It's just the beginning. There's more to come. And while it's a bit, the overall context is a bit gloomy in terms of financing and whatnot, it's also an opportunity because I think we can focus on really these data use at national level and maybe go a little bit away from these international monitoring exercise, these publication of fancy reports, as much as we love them. But I think we will see a push more to really actionable data on the ground that makes a change for people's lives. Yeah, I think from my side, that's it. I don't know, Caroline, you want still to add a word or all good for you?
I'm totally fine. Thank you so much, Johannes. All I want to say is thank your team again and everybody else joining here today.
Then with this, I would say we are 3:29. We are just in time. Thank you again for everybody coming and joining for your questions and to all the panelists and my team and Caroline and everybody else to be in this very, very nice meeting and webinar. Hope to see you soon. Have a good day.